Hello and welcome to the Annie Altman Show, the podcast, Season 5. Welcome to the 9th episode in the Communication C series. Today I'm here virtually with Dr. Michael Lennox. I will link all of his information down below. You can check out all of his different offerings online, and I'm going to immediately turn it over to you to introduce yourself to the listeners, however feels good to you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here. The monikers that I like to use when I introduce myself is that I'm a spiritual teacher first, because I dwell in the world of spiritual practice and how to help people have a better experience or a greater experience of their own spiritual seeking. But I'm also a psychologist, have a doctorate in psychology. I'm an astrologer, so I do a lot of work with people using astrology as a tool. But my first great love was actually the dream interpreting. So I've been doing that since I was a teenager as well. So spiritual teacher, psychologist, astrologer, and expert in dreams and dream interpretation.
That's cool. I didn't know the part about dreams being the first love.
Yeah. I just loved having them as a kid, just because they were fascinating, and I was an imaginative kid with a lot of fantasy life. So I thought dreams were, fun and crazy. And then my mom got a master's in social work when I was 15. And so the book Freud's Interpretation of Dreams showed up on her shelf, and I read it, and it lit me up. I don't know that I understood Freud at 15 years old, but I certainly got that dreams were access to the unconscious, and people have dreams all the time. And in high school hallways, when kids would say, "Oh my God, I had the craziest dream last night," I would engage with people about their dreams. I'd ask to hear them, and I'd have some intuitive responses. And well, you're a communication chick. You love the communication piece. The reason I followed this dream interpretation thing was because we were communicating about something interesting and intimate that happened inside of people. So I think that when I was hearing dreams, both as a teenager and now, of course, as a grown-up, I still do this, people are communicating about something that's really important and intimate that's happening inside of them. And so even just the conversation about someone sharing their dream with me is an intimate and powerful communication experience. And then if I have something to say about the dream and a person receives that and they're like, "Oh my God, that's so interesting and fascinating," then my communication sort of buttons get lit up. I will tell you that I followed those threads, because when I was a kid and said, "Tell me what you dreamed and I'll tell you what it meant," and their eyes would light up, I felt so engaged by the engagement. That's what I wanted to chase, was having those beautiful conversations with people about their insides. And that's what led, I think, to a lifetime of helping people know more about their insides and be able to communicate about what's going on inside them.
That was fun to hear the communicating of, and to underscore too what you said about you feeling engaged by their engagement, and also to the levels and the integrating and the unconscious and subconscious conversation is a lot I was hearing too, as you're and like your eyes lighting up again now of that sort of. And I really, with my small experience with this podcast or whatever, with what I've been doing with this, of that same sort of intimacy in communication for someone to share, like you were saying, this inner part of them and this piece of their experience that is really vulnerable and really intimate. And we don't have control over our dreams. No. And dreams are fucking weird and so fun and all the things. And to me, is another one of the sort of how do we get here, where do we go questions that is unknown forever. We don't ever get to know, like, where did dreams come from exactly? My experience and things before veering to art with neuroscience, I'm a big believer that right before we understand consciousness is going to be understanding the dream world and how that relates. And then it brings in this hilarious paradox of art and feelings and all of this mush.
That's right.
Control over what is coming up, and then to share that and voice that to someone.
Share that and voice it. How many people hold back the sharing of those vulnerable inside stuff, whether it's your dream life or your creative impulses and desires, or even just what you're feeling on the inside, because it is such an unknown, commodity of what's going to happen after you open your mouth and share vulnerably. And lots of people have lots of history with sharing stuff that's vulnerable inside of themselves in family environments that were not receptive to what was sacred inside that little child. And I meet a lot of those people in my work and help people heal trauma. Communication trauma is one of the big things that I work on with people in the classes that I teach, for this very reason, that there are these beautiful mysteries inside of us, whether it's our dream life or our creative impulses or even just our intimate feelings, and the vulnerability associated with sharing that with others gets formed in the home environment. And if you weren't raised with, really attentive, loving human beings paying attention to what was coming out, and most people weren't, people then develop inhibitions that are profound and lifelong, that keep them from more vulnerably and openly communicating what's inside of them with the outside world.
How those two merge and play. So I'd love to hear about two things. The first is I'd love for you to, and go in whatever order feels good, of like how stuff comes up. I'd love for you to share more specifically about those classes and what comes up with that. And some of the words that were popping into my head when you said that was a lot of validation. And again, with this sort of unconscious and conscious, both internal validation and external. And I feel like there's this human truth that we need both. And it feels like a big unknown that I run into in talking to so many people is how to navigate that need for internal and external validation. So there's one part of it, and then the other part, and I'm sharing these both with the intention that somewhere in my head these are connected more than
maybe they are.
Yeah, and I'll like break it down one by one. To me, they're really connected, because the other piece of this that I'd like to address is, quote, society and the structures of society. And I'm really glad you brought up early childhood trauma and early family things, and how we are literally all playing out the first 7 years of our lives in other interactions, and how that comes up. And
that's right. Over and over and over again.
And over and over again, over and over again. And also having this sort of shame, I find, around even addressing that publicly a lot of the time, or people, one of, why I'm saying it on this podcast is to be another voice. I know there are others who are addressing that publicly, to say, let's talk about this. We're all babies in bigger suits, and we're playing that stuff out. And we're in a societal structure that, from my perspective, is way too rigid for there to be the space for that, in terms of money and time and the structures of things and how we set, like, no shit, it's not support. More things are happening because we're not really in a supportive structure for all of this. So to go back to your classes, I'm really happy to know that there are structures being created. There are people who are addressing and doing things about it. And I'm really glad and here to learn and help how I can support them with rambles.
Love that. Well, listen, let me start by telling you how the class came up, because it was life-changing for me that this class came up, because it has emerged as the top of the pyramid of the work that I do out there, at least for this time being. I would call Finding Your Voice my most important and most attended class in general. So I was teaching a class on forgiveness, I think, maybe shadow. I don't remember which class it was, but one of my standard classes that I teach. And a woman came forward and was, one-on-one, in a one-on-one digital environment, a Zoom environment. She's talking about some stuff that's vulnerable to her. And I can see and feel and hear that her voice is shutting down. She's getting really high in her pitch and tight in her voice. And I said, honey, would you make a sigh for me? Just make a go, ah, right? And she went like, no, it's high pitch too. It was like, and I was like, oh my God, honey, I need to teach a class about finding your voice. And the chat blew up. There were about 100 people on the class. They just, boom, I want that class, I want that class, I want that class, I want that. And it was overwhelming how many people chimed in. I was like, oh, wow. True to what you're speaking to, that there is this societal demand where productivity is the coin of the realm, power and how you wield it is the coin of the realm. Gender dynamics within that are everywhere, which means right there, if you are in a woman's body, you're already on the down dog position societally, because that's part of what we're working through is, you know, the subjugation of women's voices. Even just from like being taught that the way to get a man is to smile and be, you know, stupid, is this horrible thing that I think we have to bust open. All right, so clearly lots of people want this kind of work. The space I went through from that moment in that other class to when I like was clear and launching the Finding Your Voice class, which by the way, I sort of pulled out of my hat in like 6 weeks, which was crazy. It was like already in there, structured and fully formed, this class. I just didn't know it, right? Because my thoughts were like, well, who am I to teach about this? I'm the loud guy in the room. I don't have trouble speaking up or saying my truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's not a struggle that I have. And then I began to think about my own journey with communication. It might not be that I had trouble finding my voice, but I used my voice as a defense my whole childhood and early adulthood in the opposite way, where I harmed people with my voice and my communication to keep people at bay, to keep my small, vulnerable self protected. And so I was like, oh, I actually know a lot about this. It's just from the other side of the coin. My lessons were in softening my voice, not in somehow finding its power. And that wound up being the perfect place as the teacher for such a topic, because I have a strong relationship to my voice. I know what it's like to have to do work to find its truer, more authentic, loving center. So I actually know a lot about letting go of your authentic voice, because I had a relationship with my mother who grabbed me and my voice and sort of made it hers for the first 15 years of my life. And I spent the next 15, 20 years healing that trauma. So as I formed how this class was to work, I found that it was, as I said earlier, it was like already in there, fully structured and ready to come out. And your comments about validation, inner and outer validation, I think are so apt, because I see that play out in ways where I certainly see it play out in the digital community, the Facebook community of students of mine who share their experience, where when something that's an inner validation of somebody looking at wounded places where they have said no to speaking up with a more powerful voice, and then they make some efforts to shift that for themselves, and then they share the story about that, watching people say, me too, here's my experience. Ah, yes, I struggle with that as well. And watching people have the external validation, and having that validation be the healer. How many people feel like they're in their own private, isolated pain and suffering, and that nobody else is going through what they're going through? But that's nonsense. You know, so many people are going through the same things. And when you create a space where you're both triggering people on an individual level, my homework goes deep. It is designed to trigger the shit out of people. I want people in a deep emotional struggle when they're in my classes. The homework is designed to do that. that's the inner sense of the validation experience of going in and saying, oh, right, there's reason for this inhibition. There are events behind the wounds I feel. And then by looking at them and investigating and doing some writing and drawing, there's always lots of, creative, irrational work in the homework. So it's not just didactic with the mind, it's also creative with, a ritual perspective. That's all of that inner work. And then the people who choose to interact with each other in community have a tremendous opportunity of validation of, oh, wow, right, I'm not alone in this journey. Ooh, look what she did in her relationship with her boyfriend, girlfriend, child, parent. I can use that motivation to, up the stakes of where the game I'm willing to play over here. So it's been beautiful to watch. I've now taught the class twice. It's always my most attended class of everything that I teach. And you're actually a perfect example of this. Isn't this podcast for you coming out of a need and a desire to find your powerful voice and have it, get outside of your body and into the world?
Absolutely. It is an exercise for personal communication and interpersonal communication. And these same things too, and with the Humanity, my one woman show specifically, and this list of 10 C's, that community is right after communication. And how I'm really glad you brought up that point of people feeling like we're all alone in this experience when we're all these hurt inner kids who are like, give me attention, give me validation, how do I go through this, and it's a trip too, in that we're here to heal and deal with these things and manage and love and all of that. And also, I believe that that's not the only reason we're here. Like, we're not just here because I've done that to the extreme of like, I need to heal, I need to figure out everything. And like what you're saying too, I resonate with that, learning to soften the voice too, and the calibration, the Humanity, my one human show, has a bell curve in it of scientific, spiritual, the middle way. And where is that middle ground of expression?
Ooh, I like that. I like that idea. Bell curve, middle ground, flow state, authentic, heart-centered. What is heart-centered? Like such a trope. Well, we want to live in our heart. It's like, well, what the fuck does that mean? It's like, well, I mean, it does actually have a meaning. It has a meaning, but your meaning is more accurate to what that is than the tropey words of I live centered in my heart. It's like, flow, center, authenticity. And if our motivations for saying or doing anything is coming from a triggered place or a wounded place, that's going to be everything that those words carry out into the world. So we do have to heal. It is accurate. You have to heal. But if your raison d'etre is to heal, that's like declaring that the only thing of value about you is your wound.
Very well said. Yeah, wow. That is so the root of the implication in that is that, which is like playing into victim mentality and all of those same things again. Whoa.
Yeah. Well, and if it were true that we were going to heal every wound that's coming up on a Tuesday, that would be accurate. Be like, oh my God, we can't leave this room till we heal. But the fact is that we're going to have another opportunity. It's what I say to couples all the time. It's like, we got to work this out. It's like, nah, maybe put it to bed today, because trust me, you're going to trigger each other again soon enough. So sometimes you just have to be in that centered rhythm of like, here's a moment to process and here's a moment to rest. Here's a moment to talk this out. Here's a moment to say, is there anything more to say? Can't we just sort of put it to bed? One of the things I learned, one of the best lessons I ever learned is with an ex-best friend of mine. Emphasis on ex. Cannot be friends with this person anymore. Too challenging, bit of a personality disorder. But he really said to me on a number of occasions, we do not have to process this. And it was like, wow, you're right. We don't. there's a healing happening, right? But it can't be finished today, and it's not about him, right? It's about my wound and his wound in the same room, and eventually we got that they weren't compatible enough. But there was just real grace and freedom that came when it was like, we can just agree that we're done with this moment and move on to the next moment. And if there's a healing to be had down the line, behavior is going to bring it back to our focus.
I'm really glad you shared that story, and that lesson is huge, and it's really nice too to get to. I feel like a restoring peace and faith in humanity when people talk about people they're no longer connected to in kind ways and still are able to recognize the learning from that situation, that someone gave you that gift of, we don't need to address this right now. And I have received that gift also from people, and that it's okay to put it down. And like you said to me before we recorded, like, I trust you, and to receive that and for you to share that, and that theme in relationships of the trust for vulnerability, the trust for space to say, and to the laughter and the trust of, like you said, we're gonna trigger each other again. Like this, you know, like to some end point of like, I'm fully healed and you're fully healed and we're never gonna trigger each other.
Right. Would that were true. No, we're gonna trigger each other again.
Yeah, with your classes, of how you said, I want to zoom in there more too, because for me, part of this podcast is a place to zoom in an environment that is set up for that to happen, so that I can, for my therapy project of this, do that less when I'm not on the podcast, because I know
brilliant
to do it and to zoom.
That's right. That's brilliant.
So I would love to zoom on the stuff you shared about how you purposely trigger and purposely pull that out to get to that wound, that thing that needs to be voiced, that needs to be acknowledged, that wants attention, that is going to come out for attention in other ways.
That's right.
Another piece of this is art therapy, and art as all expression as art, and all art is some form of therapy. That I'd be curious how you feel about that, or those words.
Oh God, I have a lot to say about this.
Go for it. However.
And I want to be really clear to your audience, when I'm going to use the words like art, I'm not talking about being an artist. This is not a conversation right now about talent. It's about expression. So let's just start with the idea that we all have an unconscious. The unconscious is mysterious and vast. It's one of the things I love about being an astrologer, is that the sun is our conscious awareness and the moon is the arbiter of our unconscious, right? And she sits up there in the sky, and what is she saying? She's saying with a giggle, well, sun, I see you there thinking you are all that in a bag of chips, but I got the unconscious and it's behind me, and it's as vast as the entire universe. You sun, you conscious awareness, you are nothing compared to the vastness of the unconscious mind. We are mostly that. And the unconscious is not a land of rationality or literality. It's not linear. It doesn't speak to itself in words. It speaks to itself in symbols. That's why dreams are so imagery oriented and symbolic in nature, because they're not rational. So the unconscious territory can't speak the same language we do. So when it comes to homework designed to trigger somebody into a greater experience of healing, we must approach it from two ways. So the didactic piece, the rational piece, is just questions that you respond by writing. And in Finding Your Voice, the questions are voluminous. There are 3 weeks of homework for that class where it's like you're going to write about every family relationship, every parental relationship, and writing, conscious, thought, didactic homework. But then I might have somebody do a family tree as a drawing. Now, this is where it gets rich and juicy, Annie. So if I'm working one-on-one with somebody in a class like this, and they have thoughts and feelings that are coming up from their writing and they're going to talk about them, well, that's interesting, sure. But when they pick up their family tree and show the colors they used, the strokes that they chose, the way that they did it. I had one person who, in all fairness, she is one of those artist types. I have an artist in one of my classes. She takes every class that I do. So her drawings are like, you know, beautiful and accurate. I think her family tree was expressed as yarn. What an apt image of these sort of long little strings that can get tied up into knots and bunches, right? So there's the person doing the work is going to be triggered by the questions, but once they get into the creative piece or the drawing piece, or they're charged to, you know, write a poem about it as opposed to didactically writing down all the ways that daddy was an asshole, suddenly the unconscious opens up and offers more gifts of what's down there, because what's down there can't necessarily be expressed in linear language. So I always try to make sure that every homework week includes both written didactic work, but this creative expressive work. So when I'm working with people, and this has certainly been true of my journey over the years, I mean, I have done so many drawings, and I ain't no artist. Nobody's buying my drawings. But the act of expressing myself through color and symbol and shape is somehow more healing, because it circumnavigates the rational thinking mind that we are already too overly connected and attached to. It has less for us than the beautiful juiciness of our creative expression. And this counts whether you're an oil painter of mastery or your drawing is a stick figure of daddy, mommy, and the dog.
That was really cool, specifically about yarn sharing. First, that there was someone who came on the podcast and that does one-on-one coaching, and our episode was called Notice the Yarn, and talking about untangling yarn. And so hearing that same expression and then getting to see the overlaps of how, again, those reminders that we're not alone, that we're going through the same emotions and different experiences. And it's really cool to me to hear how you honor both of those parts in the class, how you're, and really the, like, letting them be equally important and valid in all of the things. And then that being its own healing to say, take this time with your brain and with the thoughts and with the words, and also take this time specifically, no brain, no thought.
Right, no brain, no words. It's like you can understand all the twisted relationships in your family history, but the yarn image gives you kind of an embodied sense of, oh, if there's a knot, I can untie it.
Totally.
Right? That's an irrational image that will motivate somebody further into their process in a way that the words might not be able to inspire. The words get stuck in, oh, but it's too complicated, and my father's not open to that conversation, and my mother's dead, and my brother's, you know, blah, blah, blah. I can't unknot those knots, but I can sit in my meditative space and imagine my feeling thought mess as a ball of yarn, and I can feel it unwinding and unknotting and unraveling. Both, I think, are necessary.
The embodiment, like you said, and the integration, and letting the mind and body both be there and not distract either of those and either part of it. Okay, I want to circle us back to the beginning here, and dreams and subconscious, and feeling as though, well, okay, I want to start with one direct question, which is, would you say that communication is conscious or unconscious?
Oh, wow, what a great question. It's always both. It's always both. And the words are the conscious reflection. Like you can interpret what the conscious intention is that someone is offering through the words themselves. But everything else reveals the unconscious, the tempo of the words, the pausing. You know, there's this famous, that some people even know about, this word association test that came from the last century. It was actually Jung's work. Freud and Jung both worked on this word association, where I say, you know, a bunch of words and you come up with the first word that you think of, right? It's been done in every, you know, movies for the last, you know, 50, 60 years. What people don't know is they think that what the psychologist is looking at is what words you choose. So if the psychologist says mother and you say terror, that the terror is the thing. They're not. There's somebody on the side sitting with a stopwatch. And they're clicking the stopwatch when the person says the word, and they're clicking the stopwatch when the person responds, and they're writing down the time. So now what happens is, now a person who has a mother complex, they're going to have more time when the initiating word is mother, nurturing, meals, all the mothering words. They're going to wait a little longer than for all of the other. And that's the measure of the complex. So Jung would say, I can read the complex that the unconscious is expressing, but not through the words, through the pause.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Whoa.
And the movie will tell you that it's the word, you know, mother, killer, mother, you know, whatever. I'm getting lost on the mother thing. My poor mother, God bless her, rest her. May she rest in peace. We lost my mother last year. We were ready for her to go, and forgiveness was complete. So with respect to my mother, I thought that was the most interesting thing about that idea, that a person's rhythm changes when they're triggered. Their breathing changes when they're triggered. Their facial expressions change when they're triggered. And people with, like me, who know this and look at this and have years of experience with this, you can know someone's unconscious through, I mean, you can't know it literally and directly in the same way that's conscious, it's unconscious, but you can certainly see changes and shifts as someone's unconscious is expressing either expansion or contraction. It's happening all the time. It happens when two people are having, like if you were to type out the dialogue between two people who might be triggering each other and you read the words, you'd be like, oh, well, they're doing fine. But what's the signal that there's trigger? Pitches get a little higher, little tension in the face. Those are unconscious indications that something else is going on. And I think that's the richer, more juicy, more interesting thing for me as a person watching people do their thing.
Ooh, and so much too about intuition and trauma and how that can get so blurry and how much trauma can blur so much of our intuition when pause is a natural part of conversation with our breath and our rhythm. I'm so glad you're into this, that pauses exist. Breath, we inhale, we pause, we exhale, we pause. And also, how fucking cool of a metaphor that when we have some trauma part that's triggered, that it's shown by us holding our voice back.
That's right.
Not expressing and not feeling safe to share it and not even wanting to associate a word with that word because it's painful and it brings up the memory of whatever the thing is. And so even to participate in the communication is like, nah, fuck this. I'm gonna not.
Yeah.
And then how even too, like saying this out loud, that there must be some healing too in I bet there could also be harm for people depending, that in an environment with a trusted therapist, that
Yeah.
could also be really healing in terms
Yeah.
of, like what you said with your work, of bringing the trigger up to the surface to say, or even just to acknowledge the trigger of, hey, I'm noticing that you're pausing a lot with all the words before mother.
Or this woman who was working with me in that other class was like, make a sound, and she was like, eh. That was her unconscious expressing the trigger, right? I did not know how triggered she was until that moment, because her words didn't tell me as much. Let's dive in, though, for a second, because you're really bringing up a really important point, which is that when we are traumatized, people who have a lot of trauma can have a blended experience of both something that is bona fide, happening in the room, in the moment because of another person's behavior, and simultaneously they're 6 or 7 years old, and it's, if they haven't visited that trauma room yet deeply enough for healing to take place, then there's real PTSD being expressed. And I think there are a lot of people running around this planet who have what we would call PTSD from their childhood trauma and don't know it. And how that shows up is deers in the headlights. They freeze, they have no voice, they can't speak up when they need to. And so what happens, even just somebody who has that in them, coming forward to work one-on-one in a class where, 100 people are watching in the Zoom environment and it's terrifying to them. Just that act of coming forward with me in what is ultimately a safe space to be heard and seen, though it's terrifying. I would even say that there's something healing about, and I'm probably not for everybody, because I think some people's trauma need a softer container than I offer. I know that part of the healing in my classes is that I am not the soft container, right? But I'm still safe.
Because you're being you, because you're being authentic.
I think so. I think because I'm authentically being me, and because the truth is I love humanity. I love people. I love the brutality of life. You tell me the worst thing that's ever happened to you, and I'm probably going to laugh. Right, I often have to explain why.
I would love if it feels right. And as a way to wrap up here, I know to be respectful of your time boundaries.
Thank you.
This feels like a time to bring up astrology. And I would love
Sure.
to share, because in my experience with astrology, having also been when I was in my neuroscience and science mind, very much fuck astrology, that's ridiculous, meh, 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 getting super passionate about it. One of the reasons astrology holds a really special place for me is that it has helped me have language and trust and more ease into this love of humanity, and also this laughing at it, and also having a way to use laughter therapy and even also categorizing, and that is a form of therapy, to not take certain behaviors personally, to appreciate the different facets of different people, to appreciate too that we all have all the signs in us, we all have all the things in us. And I guess the last bit I'll throw in here too is that it really seems like that moment of the person doing that, expressing a held back expression to you. I'm really healing and feeling how powerful a moment that was for both of you. And it brings up for me that part of communication that is shared. And to go into spiritual woo-woo for people, tune out if you don't want to hear this. Like, you're listening to this podcast, so I don't understand. Anyways, that we are all connected also. And so that person was speaking to some part of you. They were sharing some piece that then prompted you to do these other things for people. And astrology too is that piece of that too, where, like divine appointments, which also used to be a phrase that I'd be like, fuck that shit. And now I'm like, those exist.
There are divine appointments. Yeah, I think it's funny. I would not have thought about this in this way had you not framed it for me. But given the fact that I've been an astrologer for 25 years, and one of the things that I love the most about my worldview is I live a notion that nothing is left out, right? That, you know, like coming through this, you know, couple of years of political, you know, nightmares in the United States of America, I found myself being able to say over and over again, it's like, because people would ask, like, who's going to win the presidency? It's like, you know what? Astrology isn't actually Republican or Democrat. Astrology doesn't vote, right? It's the great leveler. We are all one. So you're right that when I hear somebody share their deepest pain and I have a laughing response to it, it is pure love. It is love of their human experience, is love of the recognition of my most painful experience that I've been able to move through and heal. It's love of being in a position to do what I love for a living and let people come to me with their traumas and feel safe. I mean, that alone is a gorgeous artifact of my life's journey, is that someone who was probably not that safe to be around when I was a young man has become this person that is completely safe for other people to be around in their vulnerability. And it's not because I'm soft and woo and gentle and gonna love you. It's like, no, honey, no spiritual bypass here. We're gonna dive into that room where the traumatized child is screaming in pain, and we're gonna find a way to hold it and love it and connect to it and bring the peace that it's calling out for.
Which came from giving that to you and honoring that to you again and again, to then be able to teach that to other people.
Yeah. This idea that there's only one of us here, one consciousness, one beingness, that excites me. And I think is also what plays out for me when I'm connecting with people in this profound way, is I don't feel separate from other people's pain experience, even if I've healed the traumas of my childhood and I might be working with someone who has not healed theirs. There's something about feeling a connection, because we're all connected, that then allows, I don't know, a deeper experience of the healing to occur. I don't know how that works. I just know that it does. But it works because I show up authentically. And because I show up authentically, I attract people who are ready to show up authentically. I attract people who want to do that homework and dive into their pain, as opposed to the people who want a spiritual bypass experience that says if they only pray and meditate enough, that they're going to be, you know, in a loving place. But if they're coming from trauma, they don't dive into that, you know, uncomfortable feeling state, the healing can't happen.
It's really cool to hear how and get to see and witness how that evolves, and know that it's out there of someone honoring themselves to have more space to honor other people and communicate through all of these integrating and all of this. How do
was it difficult for you? Was it difficult for you when you first put out your first podcast? Was there stuff you had to move through just to click send or publish or whatever the
You'll laugh
right
at this. So the very first, and I actually this is cool too. The interview right before the podcast is going to come out right before you is the first guest on the podcast when coming on for the second time. So cool asking timing of that. And the first time he came on, the podcast is titled "We Are All Self-Conscious" with Avram Elner, and talking about the self-consciousness to be authentic. And that is it safe for me to be me? Can I even be here to show up as myself? And when you were sharing about the stuff with your work, and then, you know, how you're doing your healing work to create healing workspaces, and so much of what was popping into my head then was the Lord's Prayer, and that those were the two, when I was like, fuck all religion, spirituality, whatever, was the phrase, "We make plans and God laughs," which I was like, okay, yes. I can laugh at that one. That's great.
That's funny.
And then the Lord's Prayer of the distinction between what you can control and what you can't. And that sort of, you can't control your authenticity. You are who you are, and you can control whether or not you express it. And I'm reminding myself.
That's right. Ding, ding, ding. And the voice The voice is how we do it. The voice is how we connect to others. And the voice is how we take what's inside of us and share it with the outside world. And if it's inhibited between what's juicy inside of you and the waiting world that's ready to receive, how can you be authentic if you don't have an open communicative channel?
Thank you for opening your channel to communicate. I really appreciate your time and being authentic and coming on.
It was a delight and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yay.
Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in, and thanks for being you.